Unfortunately, we have recently learned with the majority of these active shooter, active assailant incidents in the United States that it does require planning, training, and preparation on behalf of the local agencies. These complex and demanding incidents go well beyond the traditional planning and training efforts of local response agencies. These incidents continue to happen in increasing numbers across the United States, which direct us to show that local, state, county, regional, and federal assets need to continue to plan, train, and prepare for these incidents. These incidents are very fast-moving, volatile, and complex. It's important to remember that the majority of these incidents are over in just 4 to 8 minutes, but can take hours, days, and weeks to respond and recover from. As we learned in some recent incidents, such as the Boston bombing and subsequent violence that occurred after the bombing, that incident required over 1,000 law enforcement officers from multiple states and multiple jurisdictions to continue operations for over 24 hours around the clock. This puts a great demand on local resources, personnel, and your operations. So it's very critical that local law enforcement agencies are familiar with the incident command system and how we're going to manage this incident, where we're going to be bringing in extra resources, extra people, and working around the clock on what is a very time-sensitive and criminal incident. One valuable tool that can assist agencies in planning and preparing for these mass violence incidents is the incident command system training that is available. The incident command system training is applicable to any type of incident or event, and that includes these fast-moving mass violence incidents. One area where we could possibly improve in the United States is taking advantage of the no-cost incident command system training that's available out there. The incident command system is not just for the fire department. It can be used by all agencies on these complex incidents that involve mass violence or incidents of criminal nature. Recently, we have unfortunately seen a large increase in the number of these incidents occurring. Up to the year 2008, we typically saw what met the definition of 4 to 5 active shooter incidents a year. Since around 2008, we have seen a dramatic increase in these active assailant incidents. We're now up to about 10 to 12 a year within the United States. Just in the past 2 months, we've had 6 to 7 incidents in the United States and Canada, and there are varying reasons for this to occur. It's important for all our jurisdictions, including the smaller agencies, to recognize that these incidents are not a big city problem. They typically are not occurring in larger urban or metropolitan areas. In fact, the majority of these incidents occur in jurisdictions with law enforcement agencies that have 100 officers or less. Even some agencies that only have 2 officers on duty at any given time have had to respond to an active shooter or active assailant incident. So it's important for us not to say that this event cannot occur here. A rigid, traditional standard operating guideline or standard operating procedure is not the right way to manage this incident. We do need to have plans in place, but those plans need to be extremely flexible. These incidents are very fast-moving, complex, and chaotic, and there's a lot of confusion involved. A lot of the agencies have learned that they have to be able to move and think very quickly on their feet to deal with a multitude of hazards. In these incidents, even when the shooter is down, there's a great increase in issues and complex problems that need to be addressed very rapidly. What we've learned with the mass violence incident, it will require greater cooperation between law enforcement, fire, and EMS. This may include firefighters and EMS making entry with law enforcement into the hot zone or the zones of diminishing threat on an active assailant incident. There's also been incidents where fires are lit, where typically firefighters may say, we will let this location burn down. You may have victims in the location that's on fire. So again, this will require a lot more coordination and cooperation amongst the agencies to make some very quick decisions. That's why it's vital to do our planning and training together with our sister agencies and departments. It may not be the plan that's going to help us manage this incident, but the planning effort and the cooperation and the networking and the contacts that we made during that process that will help us very quickly come together to manage the situation. One way to think about mass violence incidents is they are very similar to almost a military combat operation. So one option that we can use in our planning and training is to look at how the military will plan and train for the operations they're involved in. Again, these mass violence incidents are very similar to a combat operation. So ways to think about this is, example, if the military is going to assault a building or secure a building, they're not going to allow personnel to just willy-nilly make entry into the building, which right now is some of our active shooter tactics. One way the military would handle that is to build out teams and squads to search and secure that building very rapidly. So that's one option we can look at for our law enforcement agencies. And under the discussion of looking at military operations and tactics is to think of all the returning vets and experience that we have from Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. These assets may not be in command positions, but they are bringing back a lot of experience and training. At no time are we talking about firefighters and medics assaulting buildings with weapons, but let's look at some of the tactics and experience that they have from these combat environments. So I'd like to remind our command staff with our public safety agencies, whether it's law enforcement, fire, EMS, or emergency management, reach out to these returning veterans who have a multitude of experiences under their belt and a lot of training, a lot of planning involved in these hostile situations, the hostile events. Especially for law enforcement, you have military returning vets that have probably conducted hundreds of operations in the urban environment. So this is probably a valuable lesson and a valuable tool to help your agency out. The purpose of this training is just to provide some basic tools and guidelines to our public safety agencies to plan for this event. It's important to ask yourself, does our agency, our jurisdiction even have a plan in place? Have we even discussed it? Do we even have a concept? Because the day the incident occurs is not the day to try to figure that out. You're not going to have any time, and the minute the incident starts, the clock is already working against you and your agency. This planning process has got to require fire, EMS, law enforcement, emergency management, and your other planning and training partners. No one agency on its own can do all the planning and preparation for these mass violent incidents. I know in today's world and today's environment, all agencies are stretched thin, lack of resources, lack of funding, more things that they need to get accomplished. But this topic of mass violence incidents is very critical that we plan and train together. Again, as we stated earlier, these incidents appear to be occurring almost weekly now in the United States. And it would behoove our agencies to at least talk about it with your partners, how we think we would respond to this and recover from it. Unfortunately, we have learned that the threat of mass violence is a current and emerging threat. And what I mean by that is these incidents are continuing to happen. And what happens is the potential active assailant is seeing the media attention and all the attention that's garnered by these incidents, whatever their cause or reason, and this may be one of the reasons that we're seeing an uptick in these incidents. Also in the United States, we have dedicated a lot of time, money, and effort to weapons of mass destruction incidents over the past 20 years, since the Oklahoma City bombing and some other incidents that occurred in the 90s. But the threat and the practice environment in which we're operating in is constantly evolving and changing. What I like to look at is the cost of this training, and let's look at some realistic threats when we are planning and preparing and utilizing our funds. Most likely, the next attacks that are going to occur within the United States are going to be a shooting or explosive incident. That's what we've seen with an increase since 2008 has been a shooting and explosive type incident, not a weapons of mass destruction. WMD is important to plan and prepare for, but again, 99% of all attacks in the United States and around the world utilize explosives and firearms, and that is most likely going to be our next incident. All the WMD training that we have conducted in the United States is a good reference point for us to continue with the planning processes that we used, the training that we used, and again in WMD, planning and training and exercises, the incident command system and unified command is a critical component. That is the same type of efforts that we would utilize in a mass violence incident. One of the first steps that we can do in this process and planning for a mass violence incident is to pull all our key partners and agencies together, both locally and regionally, just to discuss what we would do if an incident occurred, just to talk about that concept that I mentioned earlier. These critical agencies can include law enforcement, fire departments, EMS, your hospitals or healthcare facilities, your 911 and communication centers, emergency management, if you have schools, colleges, or universities, and any other key partners that you may have in your jurisdiction to come together and discuss the threat and have a realistic discussion. How would we respond to this? Could we even respond to it? Because there are some times that we could say we may not be able to successfully respond to this incident, so how can we best prepare for it? But the key thing is to pull everyone together and let's talk about it and identify who our key partners are from these sister agencies. As we should all be familiar with, since the Columbine incident, law enforcement has developed and evolved in their response training. So in any community across the United States, at least the law enforcement agencies have been looking at active shooter or rapid deployment training and response. That could be a starting point in your community, that the law enforcement agencies invite their other partners and sister agencies in to at least observe this training and talk about this training. This has been a weakness in the active shooter training, that it only addressed the first few minutes of the incident until the shooter was down and nothing else. So let's build from that training and bring these other sister agencies in. Another community that has been at least talking about and planning for active shooter incidents is your schools and your colleges. They have been doing exercises and planning and assessments on their response to these incidents. So let's try to attach ourselves to that effort and bring everybody together. On that same note, one positive effort that we've seen taking place here in the past 2 to 3 years within the United States is what's called the joint response operations, where law enforcement, fire, and EMS agencies are finally working together to come up with those response models on how best they can respond within their community. And there are plenty of examples of these available out there. It's important as public safety agencies to reach out to our local targets in our community, our hazard targets. This could include schools, colleges, large businesses, critical infrastructure. There's an effort within the United States that's called Run, Hide, Fight. And this is planning that the civilian population can go through and training that the civilian population can go through. So for our entire response model, let's let our civilians, our community know about the Run, Hide, Fight effort and combine our efforts with theirs. So if we ever respond to one of their locations, we already know they've had some planning and some training on how they're going to respond to these incidents. Any jurisdiction within the United States can identify a target within their location, within their jurisdiction, within their community. These events have occurred in some of the smallest communities in the United States. So any department, large or small, needs to find those locations where these incidents could possibly occur. And that would be an important part of your planning and training process. So even the smallest volunteer fire department or rescue squad can find some training to help you prepare for this incident. That could include the online incident command system training. Try to reach out and find out what other regional or state emergency management training or exercises that are taking place. A lot of these exercises and training are at no cost to first responders, so you may need to do a little research, but there are some things you can do to prepare. All public safety agencies share the same priorities with this type of incident. That includes life safety and incident stabilization. All the agencies involved in the response have different means and ways and tactics that they will conduct life safety and incident stabilization operations, but those are some of our main priorities working together. Interagency cooperation is the only way to manage these type of chaotic situations, and that includes our planning process, responding to the incident, and the lengthy recovery that will take place afterward. Examples with life safety: if we don't combine our efforts and our plans on trying to handle that tactic during an incident, it will lead to confusion and problems. Law enforcement's way to secure life safety is to stop the attack and neutralize the attacker. The fire department way may be to stage 3 blocks away. EMS's way may be to go in on their own. So these different efforts, if not combined, can lead to a lot of confusion and problems during the mass violence incident. Unfortunately, public safety agencies have learned in the past few recent incidents that have occurred that it took over 30 minutes to establish a unified command post where all the multiple agencies would come together to make decisions on how to manage the incident. If you try to run this incident with multiple command posts, it'll do nothing but lead to confusion and make the problems even more complex. If a community has not done any planning or preparation for a mass violence incident, we will not have a successful response. So a review of your agency's guidelines, procedures, and planning efforts is a critical first step. Also, once we have a plan or even a concept in place, we want to conduct some kind of exercise to test that plan. That's how we're going to learn if these plans work. We just don't want to develop a plan, build a plan, and put it on the shelf. We need to conduct some type of exercise involving all the sister agencies and key partners. This can include a functional drill, a tabletop drill, or a full-scale drill, but let's make sure we test our plans with some type of exercise. It's important to know that in your community, some entities may already be doing planning and training. This could include school systems, colleges, and businesses. They may already be expecting this training and doing it themselves if they're not getting any support. So reach out to these local entities and find out what they're doing and how you can integrate into these ongoing efforts. Each community should already have what's called an all hazards or emergency operations plan. This is your community's disaster plan that already a lot of effort, time, and resources has been put into. If you have nothing else in place when it comes to mass violence, this county or jurisdiction emergency operations plan could be your initial building block or starting point to start planning for these type of incidents. An emergency operation plan provides the community framework on how they're going to respond to large-scale incidents and disasters. So we're already addressing a lot of those hazards and threats. We would just want to build mass violence into that plan. In an emergency operations plan for a community, you may not be able to anticipate every situation that could happen, especially when it comes to a mass violence incident. But it is important to have some type of generic plan in place that provides us a framework to address these issues when they happen. Also, when it comes to emergency operation plan, your department may already have someone who is a liaison with emergency management or the entity that is developing this plan. So you need to find out who your point of contact is if you even have one. Because again, the emergency operation plan could be a good starting point for you to start addressing mass violence incidents in your community. When it comes to your community's emergency operation plan, you want to make sure that you have input into this plan. This plan exists and is providing guidance, direction, and control to your community on managing and handling any disaster or large-scale incident. So it would be important for your agency for you to reach out to whoever's developed this plan, have input into this plan, and make sure that your community has a successful plan in place. Most incidents that public safety agencies respond to are over very quickly. Over 99% of our incidents are over very quickly and we move on to the next incident. These mass violence incidents will go on for days, weeks, and even months. So the only way to successfully manage that is to ensure a safe response, ensure an efficient response. It's going to require a coordinated and organized response, which is addressed in your emergency operations plan. After 9/11, a lot of the communities in the United States added what is called a terrorism annex to their community disaster plan. And this took all the agencies having input into that plan. I think we need to take that same model, that same process, and apply the mass violence incidents, these active shooters and active assailants, and start looking at adding that to our community emergency response plan. Again, those incidents are over in 4 to 8 minutes, but will go on for days and weeks and months and impact your community in a lot of different ways. And one excellent tool that was recently released by the U.S. Fire Administration provides template to communities on how they can address this in their emergency operations plan. So we need to look up the U.S. Fire Administration Response to Active Shooter Incidents template, and it will give us some tools and guidelines on how we can address these incidents in our emergency operations plan. Once you address this in your emergency operations plan, then you can start building agency guidelines and procedures. It's very critical that the incident command system be the command and control system that we utilize and should be implemented for all mass violence incidents. The impact of well-deployed and a practice use of the incident command system amongst all responders cannot be overstated. If we are not able to do the incident command system on small incidents, those daily events that occur, there's no way it's going to happen on the big event. Why do I say that? A lot of agencies put in their plan that they're going to use the incident command system on big incidents, on terrorist attacks, on active shooter incidents, on plane crashes. If we go years and years and years and never practice setting up a unified command post, sharing resources, utilizing the incident command system, we are not going to have an efficient and effective response to probably your community's worst incident. Another key component to the incident command system is the unified command. That allows us to bring all our sister agencies, our key partners together very quickly and start making some strategic decisions. Each active shooter, active assailant incident is primarily a law enforcement response until the incident is over, the attacker has been neutralized or arrested. But this response will require immediate fire and EMS participation within the incident command system and within the unified command. In any unified command setting, one agency will still be the primary agency depending on where we're at within the response. The unified command provides that proper vehicle for command and control of this incident to bring those leaders together to start making some critical decisions in a very fast manner. A well-established incident command system within that first 30 minutes of an incident will make all the difference through the rest of the incident that may go on for hours and days and even weeks. Why unified command is so essential, since we've learned in any critical incident, the first hour, the first 60 minutes will dictate what happens the next 8 hours of the incident. So it's very critical that we very quickly establish that unified command and start working on our goals, objectives, and priorities with all the key agencies. One example of why it would be important to establish that unified command very rapidly in an active shooter incident is the actual rescuing of the victims. Each agency will be trying to conduct this operation, law enforcement, fire, and EMS. And if we're not working together, we will have a chaotic situation and a lot of miscommunications. If we aren't able to effectively rescue those victims together, we will be wasting resources, wasting time. We will not be able to track those resources. We will not be able to track the patients that are being rescued. We won't know where these people are going, which hospitals are notified, how their families are notified, and all the other secondary items that will come out of that one response of rescuing the victims. So again, to address that topic and many others, we need to quickly establish that unified command. As I stated earlier, the only way we can utilize unified command in an effective manner is by practicing it. We just can't wait till we have the big one or the major incident. And one of those ways to do that we're still lacking is trying to conduct unified command on smaller daily incidents that occur. We still have every day in our communities incidents that require law enforcement, fire, and EMS. Even those smaller responses, we can pull together for a unified command, and that could be the best way to prepare for a major incident. When it comes to the incident command system, we need to be very realistic about what we're talking about. We are certainly not talking about filling out a 20-page incident action plan in the first 20 minutes of an incident. We're not talking about trying to fill out a 40-box organizational chart in the first 20 minutes, especially in a fast-moving, chaotic situation like a mass violence incident. But it is essential over those next few hours and days and even weeks to build out our incident command system and use those positions as assigned. Now, a couple of reasons that we use the unified command to bring these different agencies together to make some critical decisions. It allows everyone to jointly make decisions, as we all have different responsibilities and priorities. Number one, we all have some different objectives. Unified command will allow us to address those objectives, even though we may have different ones. We have different strategies. This will allow all the agencies to collaborate their strategies and their efforts. Also, one of the biggest issues in any incident that we've learned time and time again is communications. The unified command allows us to address the two types of communication, both internally, speaking amongst the agencies, and externally, speaking to our outside partners, the media, and the public. We want to avoid any duplication of efforts. We want to utilize our resources a lot better, and unified command allows us to do that jointly. And obviously, in these high-impact incidents that get a lot of attention, the unified command will allow us to address the media aspect of very quickly getting out the correct information to the public and the media. So these are some of the reasons why it's very important to utilize the unified command. One good example of utilizing unified command and why it's important beyond that first initial 30 minutes is the Boston bombing and the subsequent violence. There were over 100 local, state, and federal agencies involved in that response. that went on for days and days and days and actually impacted the entire city. So the only way to address all those different objectives, strategies, priorities was to bring everybody together for a unified command and give everyone their voice at the table. The unified command brings all the agencies together in what is called an integrated organization. And a key part of that is working face to face. The only way we can effectively communicate in a rapid moving incident is we've got to be face to face with our key partners. The unified command will allow us to develop that incident action plan, that we take all our objectives and put them together in the written plan that we will develop. That may not happen in the first few minutes, but we need to start developing that. Also, we have a lot of different agencies that are going to be trying to order resources from the same source. Unified command will allow us to integrate those resource ordering and come up with a better plan on how to do that. This may be one of the ways to successfully manage a mass violence incident. We're very familiar with the unified command, but we do need to become more familiar with it, conduct more training of it. Also, with unified command, it can be a struggle to initially establish that unified command. That is one of the lessons learned from a lot of the recent active shooter mass violent incidents, that it is somewhat of a struggle, a hurdle for the public safety agencies to combine their efforts and establish that unified command. So that is something that we can work on prior to an event occurring. Why it's important that we set up the unified command face to face is that will allow all the agencies to come together and deconflict any issues, problems, and crises that come up. And there will already be plenty of crises for us to try to manage during this event. There is sometimes the belief that a comprehensive radio system and everyone having different radio channels will allow us to establish a unified command. That's not going to be efficient. It's not going to be effective. The only way to have an effective unified command is that face-to-face. Time and time again with these mass violence incidents, communication systems are very rapidly overloaded, including the radio channels. Also, your communication centers and your dispatchers will become quickly overwhelmed. But us having that face-to-face will allow us to make those decisions, call for resources without having to wait on external agencies or external resources. We all have the expectation in a mass violence incident that all the high-tech mobile command posts will be showing up from a multitude of agencies. And these are an excellent tool to have, especially when you may be on scene for multiple days. But we have learned from past active shooter incidents that having multiple mobile command posts or multiple mobile command buses on scene causes additional confusion and miscommunication, because each command post may be trying to run that incident on their own. If we're going to start using the buses as an effective means, maybe we need to assign roles and responsibilities to those buses once they show up. Example, one bus is a unified command. One bus is operations. One bus is information intelligence. Again, this will depend on the response and the resources that we have available. Also, another major lesson learned with these command posts or any mobile command post or the bus is insufficient representation. Individuals from these key agencies show up to the command post and then they end up leaving the command post. Once an individual is assigned to the incident command system, he or she needs to be in that position until properly relieved. So again, the buses are an excellent tool, but let's try to use them more wisely. Also, if the incident grows large enough or goes on for long enough duration, not only will we have local and regional command buses showing up, but your state and federal agency command buses may be showing up. I have seen pictures from some of these incidents where they have over 10 to 12 different command buses there. So the best way to maybe address this is already have roles assigned and positions and tasks assigned for when these external agencies show up. We can immediately assign them, their bus, and their resources to their roles. There's a multitude of ways to run our command post operations in an incident like this. Initially, some of the response units may establish what's called a forward command post, which may be near the front entrance, could possibly be in the lobby of a building, may be in the parking lot. And that could be the initial response agencies. As our response grows in size, scope, and scale, our unified command may need to establish in a larger, more secure area. There's a variety of ways for agencies to do this. They just need to figure out, the agencies need to figure out what works best for them to establish these command posts in this very fast-moving incident. Some agencies may use the term Tactical Operations Center for the initial command post. Some may establish what is called lobby command. A lobby command is what the fire department uses in large building and high-rise fires. We could utilize that in a mass violence incident. So again, there is a variety of ways to establish a command post depending on the incident, especially in a fast-moving, chaotic mass violence incident. And when it comes to command post operations, one of the things that the fire service can assist law enforcement is how to run a multi-company response in a large structure, a large complex, a large building. Remember, the fire department knows to immediately establish command, assign roles and responsibilities, and start assigning branches, divisions, groups, task force, strike teams, depending on the incident. So these are one of the things that you in the fire service can assist law enforcement, because a lot of these mass violence incidents do occur in larger structures, high-rise building, multi-story buildings. Most active shooter and active assailant incidents will occur in a location that has large numbers of people, like a school or a business. So one of the key components that responders need to think about and plan on is accounting for victims. This is very essential for several different reasons. You may have people that have fled the scene, you may have injuries, you may unfortunately have fatalities. You may have people that are still locked down, some that have evacuated or self-evacuated, and some that have already gone to the hospital. So we have to very quickly establish contact with the facility manager of that location to start getting a general idea of how many people are we talking about and where could they possibly be. This especially becomes essential in a shooting involving a school or educational facility, because the thought and the guideline on this is we need to physically touch every single child in a school to account for them by finding them, making sure we know where they're at, and being able to advise their parents where they're at. Even though reunification may take several hours, we want to be able to tell the parents and the family members that the child is okay and we know where they're at. This task takes a lot of resources and a lot of time and can take several hours just to account for every single child. And one of the ways we can address the victim accounting is the efforts we put in place before the incident. When we are talking to facilities, schools, and businesses about how they're going to respond internally to this incident, we want them to be able to keep rosters and lists that they know they need to provide to us when an incident occurs, and that we as responders need to ask them. In the schools, they may call this the black box or the crisis kit. And one of the things that's maintained in a crisis kit or a black box is a roster of employees and students. So that's something that we very quickly may need to get hold of. Victim accounting is one task that the fire service can help in unified command while the incident is actively occurring. The fire department has the manpower and the resources and the knowledge to start tracking people and start trying to account for these victims. This is one way during the incident the fire service can assist our law enforcement brethren. One area of confusion is definitions and terms that the fire and EMS service needs to be familiar with. One is secured and one is cleared when you have an active shooter incident. It's important to remember that when we've had a major mass violence incident in a school, a business complex, a building, that entire facility will need to be secured and cleared. To clear a room or a location takes mere seconds or minutes. This is what law enforcement is initially doing in an active shooter response. They are very rapidly clearing a room, making sure there's no direct hazards and no victims, and they continue to move on. When we start securing a facility, this is a process that is a lengthy, slow, and methodical process that law enforcement will be doing. In some recent incidents, this can take hours and even days depending on the size of the location. Some of the activities that are taking place when you are securing a location is we're checking for additional victims, victims that have hidden themselves, and some have been found a day or two later. We're looking for hazardous material spills, chemicals, unknown explosives. We're using canines to search. We're using pole cams to check in ceilings. We could be utilizing our thermal imagers from the fire department. Securing the facility is a very slow, back-searching, back-clearing process that may take some time, and this could be another task that the fire service could assist on. While law enforcement is securing the facility, which again can take hours and even days, the fire service can assist in several ways. One is by utilizing resources like forcible entry tools, thermal imagers. There could be the potential for hazardous materials and biohazard. We may need to decon our law enforcement investigators. So there's a lot of different ways that the fire service can assist, both manpower and resource-wise. During an active shooter, active assailant incident, you may also find yourself having to manage multiple incidents beyond the scene of the attack. And again, the only way we can actually do this is to utilize that incident command system in unified command to break down the roles and responsibilities of each one of these scenes or locations. These scenes could include the scene of the attack, the shooter's residence, shooter's vehicle, the hospitals, a family assistance center where victims and their family members may go, a reunification center, and beyond. So you could actually have 10 to 12 locations that you're having to manage because of one active shooter incident. And each one of those sites is going to require resources and coordination. So again, we can fall back on the incident command system to allow us to successfully manage that endeavor. If we have those multiple locations, the incident command or the unified command will start to make decisions on identifying the resources that are available, where we're going to assign those resources, make sure everyone knows all the resources that are available to you, especially if you're having to run 5 or 8 or 10 crime scenes at one time. Also, one of the issues with major incidents is freelancing, and that will become worse if we have multiple incidents or locations that we're trying to manage. With the incident command system, resources check in and we can account for them and we demobilize them. So even with multiple resources and multiple crime scenes and multiple locations we're having to manage, the incident command system will provide us the tools to make that happen. It's important to recognize that these incidents are going beyond one person with a pistol. Some of these incidents are becoming what are called complex attacks, and the complexity of these incidents has continued to grow. Even in the past few months, some new tactics have emerged. These shooters are enhancing their tactics with what's called asymmetric warfare, and these are very similar to a military operation or a major terrorist attack. These can include body armor, automatic weapons, homemade explosives, deploying smoke and gas bombs, chemical weapons, barricades. So now the term that's shifting from active shooter is going to active assailant, because you may have an attack where an individual is using weapons, homemade explosives. He may only be using a knife. He may be using fire as a weapon. He may use his vehicle to run over people, or it could be a combination thereof, all those different type of attacks. So again, fire and EMS need to be very familiar with the fact that these incidents are becoming more lethal and more complex. It's important that communities notify hospitals as soon as there's even the possibility of a mass violence incident. And this applies to any mass casualty incident, especially a mass violence incident. If we can give hospitals just a few minutes of notice, they can go into what's called an internal disaster mode and start preparing for an influx of patients. With mass violence incidents, in the past few incidents, some victims have self-transported to the hospitals, and that may be the only notification that the hospital has. So we've got to make sure we can notify them. Also, when it comes to our healthcare facilities or our hospitals, just moving all the patients to one hospital may not really be mitigating the problem. We may have just moved the disaster from one point to the other. That's why it's important that your hospitals be part of this discussion and this unified command effort. So when it comes to our hospitals and our other partnering agencies and entities, it's important that we immediately notify them when we find out we think we may have a mass violence incident. Just a few minutes can make all the difference for saving lives, especially in the hospital setting. We need to be able to make sure we identify who these partners are and how do we network with them and how do we notify them. In the immediate time that we find out we have a mass violence incident, those communication centers need to start making those notifications. One critical component of a large multi-agency response is a staging area. If we allow the resources to respond willy-nilly into the scene, park anywhere they want to, this can lead to, again, to more confusion and miscommunication. It's very important with any major incident, including a mass violence incident, to try to establish one staging area with a staging area if possible. There's sometimes been the discussion that there is an operational need to separate law enforcement and fire and EMS resources in any major incident, and there is no operational need to separate them. If we have a well-established staging area with well-established staging officers, this will allow us to more efficiently identify the resources we have available, call for those resources, assign those resources, and demobilize those resources. What we've learned in past incidents, if we have multiple staging areas, just like multiple command posts, it leads to confusion and miscommunication. So that's two areas we've identified so far that we already know we need to establish. Very quickly establishing that unified command, and very quickly that unified command establishing that staging officer in that staging area. If we don't make those two things happen, we're going to lead to multiple resources showing up with no command, control, or organization or coordination. One location that should already be pre-identified in your community is what's referred to as the Emergency Operations Center. And this is the location that's activated in case of any crisis, disaster, high-impact event. This is a location where your key agencies come together. Obviously, it's very critical that if we have a mass violence incident, the EOC is an excellent location to bring all the resources together to start looking at long-term response, recovery, the management of the resources, the lengthy multi-agency investigation, all the support efforts, all the other efforts that are taking place. Now, there's a few reasons that you activate an Emergency Operations Center, and a mass violence incident could meet several of these. One is the resources that are required are beyond our local capability. Again, any active shooter incident will exceed your local resources. The emergency could be of a long duration. Again, if the incident's over in 4 to 8 minutes, it can take days and weeks to recover from this incident. You will have multi-agency jurisdictional involvement, even at the local level, the state level, the regional level, and the federal level. You may have unique or emergency problems, which definitely would be provided by an active shooter incident. So again, the Emergency Operations Center is a location already established to manage these incidents that provide you the resources, which is a lot better than standing in a parking lot for 2 days. Take a look at the list on slide 33. These are all the individuals, agencies, and entities that are going to show up at your incident or your event. If we don't have roles and responsibilities for them to do, they're going to do their own roles and responsibilities. They'll be freelancing. But if we activate that EOC, it'll give them a task that will fit in with what you're trying to accomplish. Another important facility and task that'll need to take place in these active shooter events, especially that may go on for days and even weeks, is what's called the JIC, or the Joint Information Center. This is the location that will involve all key agencies and players to manage all the local and national and even international media efforts that you're going to face. The issue with active shooter incidents is they are conducted real time under intense news and social media scrutiny and public interest. From the minute the dispatch occurs till the funeral of the victims, there is a lot of interest and scrutiny in your response. The Joint Information Center will allow you to try to address that and bring all those key agencies together to get our same message out across the board. Just like the Unified Command Post, the Joint Information Center allows all the key agencies to come together and come up with the message that they want to share externally with the media, the community, and the family. If you do not establish public information officers and joint information centers very quickly, what's going to happen is obviously the media is going to look for that information anywhere they can find it. And what has unfortunately happened in some past events is the media may talk to distraught family members, community members, witnesses, and those people have become your spokesperson for this event. So another essential tool is getting that public information officer out and establishing that joint information center. Due to the intense scrutiny of the media, the public, and social media to these events, smaller jurisdictions that may not have full-time public information officers may need to identify others that could fill that role in case of a major incident like a mass violence incident. This could be from folks from other departments, could be town spokesperson, but someone who can very quickly get in front of that camera and start putting out the correct information. Again, with the intense scrutiny, a lot of incorrect, far-fetched, and wrong information is going to be coming out very quickly. We recognize the fact that in a mass violence incident, family members, friends, bystanders will quickly flood the scene. So one of the messages that we want to put out through the Joint Information Center and the public information officer is providing them those locations where they can meet their family members. This could be a reunification location for parents. It could be a secondary staging area for adults. But one of the reasons we want to get that public information officer established very quickly is to get that information out to the friends and family members of the victims and the witnesses. Also, it's important to think about maybe assigning a liaison officer to the families of victims, because the media will put these family members on intense scrutiny. So there's several resources you could look at, including maybe those folks from your region that conduct critical incident stress management, critical incident stress debriefing, to maybe be the liaison with these family members to help them in how they manage and deal with the media scrutiny that they are going to receive. At some point in a major incident, the state agencies and federal agencies have what are referred to as victim assistance teams, but it may be some time until you see a victim assistance team. So think about what resources do we have locally to help these family members and manage the media. One area where we've learned that we need to improve on is dealing with the media, managing that media scrutiny that we're going to receive, and we know we're going to receive it. There will be requests for dozens and even hundreds of interviews in the first few hours of these incidents. I'm familiar with incidents of within minutes of the incident even being dispatched, the media is already calling, asking for information and asking for press statements and media releases and press conferences. So we definitely need to recognize that we need to have the resources in place. Just like responders may say this is the response of a lifetime, the reporters may call this the report of a lifetime. So they're going to work very hard to try to get the best message out and the best story they can. So that's why important, once we've established that command post, that unified command, that all media releases, comments, and press statements come through the command post to the PIO or Joint Information Center if it's established, and then goes out. We want to make sure that everybody's on the same sheet of music, and again, the only way to do that is establishing that unified command. The initial media reports during an active shooter, active assailant incident will be wrong, incorrect, and far-fetched. And we cannot respond to that when that happens. We need to respond to the information that we know as much as possible is accurate and timely. Also, in today's media world, or media realm, the position of the Public Information Officer in the Joint Information Center is now a 24/7 non-stop effort when it comes to these major incidents. Also, the days of we will do one briefing in the AM and one briefing in the PM for the media, that will no longer fly. You will be doing multiple interviews through multiple means, including online interviews and phone interviews, on top of doing the normally scheduled press briefings. So the Public Information Officer Joint Information role is now very critical and very timely, and may be a full-time position now when it comes to these major incidents. Also, with social media, the Emergency Operations Center, or that unified command, needs to very carefully think of the social media message that we're going to be putting out. You cannot answer every question or inquiry that comes in through Twitter or Facebook. What you can do is keep putting your message out. And so that's going to come again through the unified command and the Joint Information Center. Another location we're going to have to consider during a mass violence incident, especially if it involves children or you have victims, injuries, or fatalities, is what's referred to as a Family Assistance Center. A Family Assistance Center is a location secondary to the site of the incident. It should never ever be at the site of the incident. It can be a secondary location, like another school, like another part of a campus, at another building, even at a hotel room or a hotel. A Family Assistance Center, a couple things are going to happen there. This is we're going to provide guidance counselors, clergy, death notifications, resources available, reunification. It depends on the type of Family Assistance Center that you set up. But it's very important that we take care of the victims, because the eyes of the world are on your agencies when this incident occurs. One task that we don't do so well with any major incident is post-incident demobilization. Post-incident demobilization is actually part of the incident command system, and that's where we are scaling back our response using a process, returning resources back to service, and taking care of our people. We're also going to be trying to collect information and data for any reports and intelligence that come out of the report. This is also the time to account for personnel and equipment, and again, getting those resources back to duty, back to normal. The demobilization plan is where we want to try to take care of our responders and our resources and trying to get them back in service. So again, this is actually part of the incident command system process. If I've had a major incident and have had 800 responders come to my community, we don't just clap our hand and say the incident's over, everyone go home. Using the demobilization plan, we will have a process that will return these people back to their locations while we're keeping track and resources and records of everything we used during the incident. Demobilization is one of the processes or missions or tasks that external and outside agencies can help you with. So it's important to think about this process. When you start demobbing plan is when you start building your incident command system. When I know that I'm starting to bring a lot of resources in, I have to start thinking about releasing these resources, covering the rest of the community, and all the other assorted items that come from post-incident demobilization efforts. One area that we can improve in for all public safety agencies, and especially a consideration for a catastrophic, tragic mass violence incident, is critical incident stress management, critical incident stress debriefing, or peer counseling. There's several different definitions and terms for this. You definitely need to consider at least offering the opportunity to all victims and responders to go through some type of CISM, CISD. You're going to get a lot of external help that's wanting to try to come and assist your community in the days and weeks following a tragic mass violence incident. But we want to make sure this is one area where we have the appropriately trained individuals that are going to conduct the CISM, CISD efforts. Again, we also never ever want to combine responder and victim CISM, CISD together. That has been done before and does not have a good outcome. So it's also important to know that in these incidents, responders may know victims from the incident. They may even know the aggressors, which has happened before. So that's why we need to address, or at least think about, CISM, CISD, and where these resources are available. Another critical task that you may have never thought about before when it comes to any critical incident, including a mass violence incident, is the medical examiner operations. We may have the perception that an army of medical examiners are going to show up and manage the deceased and fatalities from one of these terrible incidents. They will show up and they have a role to play, but they are going to need local assistance. There's a lot of tasks that are going to have to be accomplished to support the medical examiner operations, and every one of those requires multi-agency response, which includes law enforcement and fire and EMS agencies. This includes human remains recovery, the morgues that may be sent up, the family assistance centers that I talked about, and those victim assistance teams, the media, the Joint Information Center, volunteers that may be showing up, and again the CISM, CISD. All those efforts just related to the deceased is going to require local agencies, local public safety agencies assisting in their efforts. So we've identified some of the issues and operations that you'll have to look at with a mass violence incident. So let's discuss some of the resources that are available to you. One no-cost resource available that no one ever thinks about related to active shooter, active assailants is your incident command system training. Remember, that incident command system methodology can apply to any type of incident, any kind of disaster. One no-cost resource is the Incident Command System online courses. These can be accomplished, completed by all responders of all levels. 2 courses for everyone, the ICS 100 and the ICS 200. Both those classes cost no money, are done online, and can be done by every single firefighter, law enforcement officer, and medical responder. Also, our supervisors, those that would be in an incident command position within that unified command position, can take 2 classes, more advanced than the 100 and 200. That's the ICS 300 and ICS 400. Those courses are required to be accomplished in a classroom setting, which is the best way to do them and learn everything you need to do. In the ICS 300 and 400 classes, you actually conduct exercises. And if you wanted, you can conduct an active shooter exercise as part of those classes. So in each state, there are ICS instructors available. It might be important to reach out to those ICS instructors and see what other classes they offer, maybe what classes you can develop. We have conducted ICS workshops specifically for mass violence active assailant incidents. So that's another tool that you can use to accomplish your planning. Some of the other final steps that you can take if we're looking at planning and training and exercising for a mass violence incident is one, reach out to your local emergency management or emergency services office and see if they're already involved in these active violence, active assailant planning efforts. If not, you may be able to steer them into doing that. Also, in every community in the United States, law enforcement is doing active shooter or rapid deployment training. They're already accomplishing this. At least try to engage as fire and EMS with your law enforcement agencies to see how they respond and what role you could play. Be familiar with your county's emergency operation plan. That does exist in your community. You may need to search for it, but it is there. That will be your general framework to respond to any disaster, any high impact incident, including an active shooter. I can't stress it enough when it comes to the incident command system. There is a lot of no-cost incident command system training available out there that will help you manage one of these events. Once we feel comfortable with having our plans in place and maybe have done a little training, let's start looking at doing active shooter, active assailant exercises. One of the easiest ways to take an exercise is take an incident that occurred somewhere else and apply it to your community. How could my community respond to an Aurora, Colorado theater shooting, a Virginia Tech campus shooting, a Boston bombing incident? How would my community handle that? And so you can work with your emergency management representatives to develop some type of exercise for that. There is other training available on mass violence out there. And probably the key component, a trained and experienced team works a lot better than the best written plan. So let's try to pull that team together and talk about how we're going to respond to a mass violence incident in our community.